This is a LaFerrari, the car that is so ridiculous, so insane, so amazing, so show-stoppingly incredible that Ferrari simply named it LaFerrari, the Ferrari, because it is the definitive Ferrari, and that's all you need to know. But today, you're going to know a little bit more because I'm going to review the LaFerrari. I've borrowed this LaFerrari from David Lee, who is a collector of Ferraris and other cars here in Southern California, and you can follow him on Instagram with the handle you see on the screen, and you should follow him because he has an insane collection, which I am standing in now, that includes not only the LaFerrari, but the Enzo, the F50, the F40, and a lot of other stuff. And I'm going to talk with David a little bit later about this car and about his collection. For now, a little overview. The LaFerrari is Ferrari's fifth modern supercar, following up on the 288 GTO, the F40, the F50, and the Enzo. Power comes from a mid-mounted V12 that makes 790 horsepower, which sounds ridiculous, but then there's also a mild hybrid system that can boost that figure up to 950 horsepower in short bursts. It also has 664 pound-feet of torque. Now the top speed is around 220 miles an hour, and 0 to 60 is in 2.4 seconds. It is absolutely mind-boggling. And so is basically everything else about this car. When this car was new, the sticker price was $1.4 million. Since then, the market has spoken, and these are now trading hands above $3 million for a car. Now, Ferrari says they only built 500 of these for the entire world, and when it was new, you had to be invited to buy one. So just because you had the money doesn't mean you could actually get one of these. Ferrari had to approach you and offer you the opportunity to buy a LaFerrari. And there's more, of course, and so today I'm going to show it to you. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the LaFerrari, and I'm going to show you all of the quirks and features of the $3 million Ferrari supercar. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the LaFerrari, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the most expensive Ferrari models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the LaFerrari with one of the most noticeable items you first see right when you walk up to it, and that would be the mirrors, which come way off the car like little mirror antennas protruding from the door. Now, the reason that they have to do this is that the body of the car is a lot wider than the passenger compartment, and so in order to get the mirror far enough over to actually see anything, they have to put it on this long carbon fiber post, and so it's like a foot off the car. Now, one of my favorite things about the mirrors is the fact that they fold in, but the carbon fiber mirror post is fixed in place. Only the actual mirror bit folds in. So if you want to fold the mirrors, you can do that, but it only gives you like an extra inch to narrow your car if you're trying to get into a tight space or make sure someone won't hit you. Most of the assembly just stays in place, which I think is kind of funny. Now, next up, we move on to the door itself and getting in. But first, one interesting item with the door, it contains the Ferrari shield on the side of the car. Now, typically, in basically all other Ferrari models, that shield is mounted on the fender. You can see here on the Enzo, it's on the fender. On the F50, it's on the fender. Basically, any other Ferrari, it will be on the fender. But in this car, there's no fender piece that has enough flat surface area to mount that shield. So instead, they stick it on the door, which is very unorthodox in the Ferrari world. Then again, it's a bit of a different Ferrari than most. Now, when you go to get into the car, you will notice when you look at it that there's no immediately obvious door handle on the side. But if you slide your hand under this line here, you will in fact find the door handle down there. You kind of pull on it and then the door opens up. And one interesting item in there next to that door handle, there is a keyhole on the outside of the LaFerrari. This is something you would never see if you're just standing next to it because your angle prevents you from seeing it. But if you actually crouch down and get under there, you will see there's a keyhole to get in case your key fob battery fails and you simply must drive your LaFerrari. But anyway, stick your hand under here, you open the door, and then it opens upwards just like you would expect the door to open in an exotic car. And it looks very cool when it's opening, and obviously when both doors are open at once, it looks very, very special, very unique, and tells you this isn't your normal Ferrari. Now, next up, with the door open, you can see what I was talking about earlier about how the body of the LaFerrari is a lot wider than the interior. You can see there's a big gap between the edge of the interior and the edge of the body of the car. The interior is actually much narrower, and the body sort of goes on around it. One of the reasons that the door ends up being that much wider is that it has a channel inside of it to send air into this air intake. The door is specifically shaped in a way to make sure air flows down it and then into this intake, so this giant engine can get enough air back there, since that's one of the challenges of a mid-engine car, getting enough air into the engine, and that's one of the ways they solve it. And next up, we move into the interior of the LaFerrari, where there are so many quirks and features. I'm going to start with one of the most obvious ones you see the moment you climb inside, and that would be the floor mat. It's not like a cloth floor mat like in your car. Instead, it's this weird leather thing that kind of comes out of the floor and says LaFerrari on it. It's a very unorthodox floor mat. It's fixed in place there into the carbon fiber at your feet. Never really seen anything like that before. The next thing you notice if you're climbing in on the driver's side is the steering wheel, and specifically the fact that the steering wheel isn't really a wheel at all. It's not circular. In fact, it's not even close to circular. It's not like mostly circular with a flat bottom. It is pretty much square or a hexagon, whatever you want to call it, but it is not a circle like in almost every other car. It's a very unusual design, but common in performance cars and race cars. I guess it allows you to grab it a little better on the side since they're straight up, but it's unusual to see on a road car. One cool thing about this steering wheel, at the bottom you can see David Lee's name is actually printed in there. Ferrari will personalize that kind of stuff for you, and that makes your LaFerrari seem just a little bit more special than everyone else's, or than it would if you bought it used. Now, the steering wheel also contains a lot of other items, as most Ferrari steering wheels do. You have the windshield wiper controls, for example. You also have the drive mode selector, and you also have my personal favorite, that would be the turn signals. Ferrari's theory is they don't want you to have to take your hands off the wheel for any essential functions, so there are buttons directly on the steering wheel, right and left, that you can use to put on the right and left turn signals, and I love that. I think it's such a great idea, and I wish more normal cars had that too. Now, another interesting button you will see on the steering wheel over on the left is this bright red engine start button. Engine start button, pretty common in a lot of cars these days. The unusual thing about this car is you can't just get in and press it. It's like an old school car. You have to get in, put the key in, turn the key, and then press it, which is a surprise for a car that was made in 2014, 2015, especially a supercar like this one. One other interesting thing about the steering wheel, the middle part of the steering wheel is not the horn. You press it and nothing happens. Instead, the horn is kind of hidden over on the sides in the upper right and the upper left, so it's easily accessible to your thumb, so you can just instantly tap the steering wheel instead of having to reach into the middle, which you wouldn't want to do if you're on a racetrack and concentrating and you need to honk at someone. Now, next up, another item you notice when you climb inside the car is obviously the seats. Now, these seats are not as grippy and as tight as the sports seats in a lot of modern exotic sports cars, and I kind of like that. It's nice to have a little break from your butt being squeezed. One interesting thing about these seats, though, they are fixed in place. They don't move. Instead, if you want to adjust your situation, if you're the driver, you move the pedals. There's this little plastic lever in front of the seats. You pull it, and then the pedals, you can see they slide forward. And then if you want to push them back and get it perfectly adjusted, you just leave that lever up, and you can kind of push it with your legs or allow it to slide forward to exactly where you want the pedals to be. And that's how you adjust things in this car. You can't move around the seat. They're fixed, presumably to save weight, complexity, and to help out with headroom, since they don't have to mount the seats on seat rails if they fix them in place. Now, next I want to talk storage inside this car. This is one of the most insane, amazing supercars in the modern era, so storage is not really a huge concern for Ferrari, and indeed there's basically none. There's no netting behind the seats, there's no center console storage, you don't get any of that stuff. Instead, they had to get creative with a few storage items. For example, you see this little rubber tab hanging down in the passenger footwell? If you pull on that, it's a little net. and you can stick small items there, like maybe registration or papers. You look over to the side in the passenger footwell, and there is another little net in there for more papers, nothing substantial. My personal favorite storage item, though, is the fact that this car has the world's tiniest glove box. You press on this little silver tab over on the passenger side of the dashboard, and this piece pops up, and it is insanely small. I am currently sticking my hand in as far as it will go. You can't even really get a note card in there, but it is a glove box nonetheless, a very, very small one. Probably the most impressive thing about the tiniest glove box in the world is the fact that it has a USB port in there. So they wanted to make sure they included that, even though they were making such a ridiculous, laughable glove box. Next, another interesting item. On the side of the center console in the driver footwell area, you can see there's a piece of red leather in there. You might be wondering what that's for. Well, the theory is if you have your knee down there and you bang into the center console, that red leather will keep you from getting hurt. Or if you have something down there, you hit the center console, it won't damage it. That's there for your comfort and convenience. Think about that. This is a car with absolutely no interior storage, but they put a little piece of red leather so your knee doesn't get hurt. Next up, a few other interesting items inside this car. One is the dome light. It's between the seats, and to turn it on, you push on it. To turn it off, you push on it again. Very simple, very easy, very normal dome light for such a crazy, insane car. But if you've wanted to know how the dome light works in the LaFerrari, now you know. Another interesting item is the sun visors. They are incredibly tiny. You can see my hand basically covers the entire sun visor when it's down. In fact, the sun visor is so small that the airbag warning basically takes up the entire thing, which isn't usually the case in automotive sun visors, but they're very, very small in this car. Now, another interesting and small item in that vicinity is the rear view mirror. Very simple rear view mirror. Looks like something you would find in basically any other car, but very small. And the reason for that is the back window just isn't really very big. You don't need any more mirror than this, so effectively they just give you what you need. Now, interestingly, above the mirror, you will find three circular buttons up there that are kind of hidden. The button on the left puts the car into fully electric mode. The button in the middle is the door locks, pretty simple. And the button on the right puts it in tow mode. I guess so if you go to tow it, the alarm won't go off or whatever when you're rolling it. But the interesting thing up there, let's go back to that button on the left. That puts it into electric mode. What is that? It's a picture of a car with arrows pointing in each direction. I asked David, the owner, and he was like, I don't know why it looks like that, but that's what it does. Now, those buttons are a little strange up there, especially the door lock button kind of hidden above the mirror. It's an odd placement, and this interior actually has a few other odd placements. For example, there is a fire extinguisher that takes up basically the entire passenger footwell. Now, I've seen fire extinguishers in passenger footwells before, but usually they're very small to allow the passenger room for their feet. Not in this car. It's a really big fire extinguisher. There's no mind paid to the fact that it will make the passenger uncomfortable, but it's there so you can save your LaFerrari in case of fire. I guess that's more important than your passenger's comfort. Another rather odd placement is the warning lights in this car, the check engine light, the airbag light, that kind of thing. They're not in the gauge cluster, which is a screen. Instead, they're on this little angled panel in the dashboard. You put the car in accessories mode and they all turn on, and you can see they're all kind of pointed at you from the middle of the dashboard, which is a little bit unusual, but I guess the theory was they needed one place to put them since they didn't want to put it in the very configurable gauge cluster screen area, and that is the place they chose. Kind of unusual. And next up, moving down from that center gauge cluster warning light area, we move on to the climate controls in this car, which are pretty similar to the climate controls in basically any other modern Ferrari with all the arrows and the little dial that turns up the fan speed. It's all fairly standard for a Ferrari. One interesting thing, they're in Celsius in this car. You pay $1.5 million when it was new for a LaFerrari, and they won't even convert the climate controls to Fahrenheit for you. I find that to be kind of absurd, but that's the Ferrari way, I guess. Another dial that is shared with other Ferraris over to the left of the steering wheel, the headlight dial, that one is pretty much taken directly out of other Ferrari models. But going back to the climate controls for a minute, something I love in this car is the climate vents. I think they look wonderful. You can move them around and place them exactly where you want the air, but the coolest part is they look like exhausts, and I just think that is so cool. It looks like you're revving your engine. even though you're just turning on the climate controls. Now, next we move on to the center console, where there are a few unusual items. Probably the most unusual is the axle lifter button. You can see it here. It looks like a hat with little circles and an arrow. I guess that's supposed to be a car. It is not a great representation of a LaFerrari, but it's the button they use nonetheless. Obviously, if you push that, the front end kind of comes up a few inches to help you clear lower curbs, driveways, and angles. The other interesting thing in the middle here is the fin, as I call it. It's this carbon fiber fin that sticks out from the center console, and it has 3 buttons on it: R, auto, and PS. That's reverse automatic for the transmission, and PS is power start, kind of like launch control. But the fin itself is such a bizarre thing. Ferrari really doesn't want to have a center console of buttons like basically everyone else, so instead they have this weird angled carbon fiber fin. It is very distinctive, unique, and kind of odd. Now, in front of the fin, you have a little storage area. I will admit there's some storage here, although it isn't covered, so you can't really put anything there that you don't want to fly around in case you're accelerating hard. And above the non-covered storage area, a couple of other interesting items. You have a USB slot, and you have a little power outlet. You pull down this little plastic thing, and you can plug in a charger or whatever else you might have into the center console of your LaFerrari. Now, next up, I want to move on to the door panel, and when you take a look at it, you'll notice there's no storage pocket in the door panel. I told you there's very little storage in this car. I think the theory with not putting one on the door panel is the doors go up, so if you have something in there, it could easily fall out when you open the door, so they just don't bother at all. But anyway, in terms of getting out of the car, it's pretty easy to do. You have this plastic handle on the door panel, you just pull it, and then you push up, the door opens, and you can climb right out. Now, an interesting item with the doors in this car is the grab handle situation. In a lot of cars, you're going fast, you want something to grab onto, and usually it's kind of right above your head. But in this car, it's actually on the A-pillar, like on the windshield frame. That's where the grab handle is, and you kind of grab onto it, you pull it down, and then when you're driving fast, you have something to hold on for dear life. Now, it's interesting because most automakers don't put it there, but Ferrari did, and I suspect the reason is when they were developing this car, they knew they would eventually make a convertible version, and they couldn't put it on the doors because the roof could come off, so they stuck it there instead. That should have been our first clue there would eventually be a LaFerrari convertible, which of course there was, and it was called the Aperta. Now, one more interesting door-related item in this car. Over on the driver's door, you can see there are 3 circular buttons. The one on the left opens up the front trunk, the one in the middle opens up the fuel door, and the one on the right opens up the charging door for the hybrid system. I will cover those things in more depth in a couple of minutes. One other item in the middle that's worth noting is between the 2 seats. You have a carbon fiber panel that comes in here, and there's a little tiny plaque that says limited edition 1 of 499. It doesn't tell you which one you have, but it does remind you how special and limited your LaFerrari is as you drive it along. Now, next we move on to the tech and the screen situation in this car. You don't have a center screen like in a lot of cars. Instead, it's all driver focused, and so the screen is the gauge cluster right in front of the steering wheel. Now, the screen is split into 2 separate components, if you will. There's a left part and a right part, and those components are controlled with 2 separate areas of controls. The right bit is controlled with these little controls to the right of the steering wheel. There's a little circle, there's a volume knob to turn up and down the radio, and that sort of thing. But those controls don't do most of the work. Instead, most of the screen changing is done by a set of controls located on the door panel, believe it or not. You can use these controls on the door panel to do most of the controlling of the gauge cluster screen, and the most important thing you can do is change the gauge cluster display, and you have 4 different options. Now, 3 of those screen options are designed to be used on the racetrack. The first one is called warm up, and I guess you put it on while you're warming up on the track, and it shows basic vehicle displays, nothing more. The next one is called time, and you put that on, I guess, when you're doing timed laps, and it makes it easier for you to count lap times and restart lap times and that sort of thing while you're driving on a track. The last one is called race, and I guess that's for all-out crazy track driving on a race situation. You put that on and it shows various different gauges over on the left screen, showing like your vehicle temperature, oil pressure, oil temperature, all the really important stuff you might need to keep an eye on if you're going flat out on the racetrack. The final display is not intended to be for racetrack use. It's more for kind of street driving. It's what I would call regular. You put that on and you have the familiar yellow Ferrari tachometer display in the middle, and that's probably the screen you would use if you're just driving around town like normal in your LaFerrari. And those controls to the right of the steering wheel, they change their function depending which screen you're on. So if you're in one of the race screens, you can use those controls to the right to monitor your lap times, and you can even insert a USB stick that will kind of keep track of prior lap times on this track or whatever. If you have it on just the general regular screen, then those controls to the right of the wheel, they can change the radio station and do more traditional, normal driving activities like that. Now, you can use those controls on the door panel to cycle through various displays in the left part of the gauge cluster screen, and there are a few interesting ones I found. For example, if you go into settings, there's something in there called long run. What is that? I couldn't tell you. Really don't know. One other interesting display in that screen over on the left, there's the display that looks kind of like a plus sign. It's actually axes, and on the up and down axis it shows how much brake or how much throttle you're using at any given moment. Left to right axis shows your G-forces, which is kind of a cool thing to monitor if you want to drive your LaFerrari really hard. Now next up, I want to move on to the outside of the LaFerrari. I want to start with the fuel cap, which is over on the driver's side directly behind the driver's window. This one is pretty straightforward. You just press that little button on the driver's door panel that I showed you earlier, the fuel cap pops right open, and then you stick the fuel filler in there, and that's how you put fuel in the LaFerrari. But that's not the only way you put fuel into the LaFerrari. Now, I mentioned earlier this car has a mild hybrid system, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics of how it works, but there is a second, basically, fuel door over on the passenger side. Again, press the button on the driver's door panel, and this one pops open, and this is where you insert your charger, so you keep the electric motor in this car charged up, and that gives you the extra power boost if you want. And it allows you to operate this car in fully electric mode if you want, although only for very short periods of time. Now, just to clear up some misinformation, you don't need to always have the car charged up to drive it. It will run on its 750 horsepower V12, even if it is without any electrical power. But if you keep it charged up using this sleek looking charger that Ferrari gives you when you buy one of these, if you keep it charged up, you can attain that extra power and get the full performance out of the car, which is one of the benefits of it. Now, next we move on to the front of the LaFerrari, and this car has one of my favorite front-end designs of basically any exotic sports car in existence. I love how everything kind of comes to a point in the front, like a race car. Contrast that with the Porsche 918 Spyder, which is a fantastic car, but the front-end styling looks like a fairly typical Porsche. Not this car. Everything kind of comes to this point, and every design and style item in the front is leading to that direction. The look of the headlights, the fenders, the front cone, everything is just so crazy and aggressive and angry. The angle that you're seeing the car in really is one of my favorite Ferrari angles that exists. I just think it looks really, really cool from the front. But anyway, let's move on to the front trunk. You're thinking, well, there was no storage inside the car, so this is Ferrari's chance to pack it with storage and you can take your LaFerrari on a weekend trip. Not quite. You press this little button on the key fob, and that pops open the front trunk, and then you go in here and you actually open it up, and you will see a fan. That takes up the vast majority of this front trunk area. Truthfully, there's no storage anywhere in this car, inside or out. You do have one little piece of storage in here. You fold up this carbon fiber panel with these signatures on it, and you can see there's a little storage cubby. Right now it has the car cover in it, and that is pretty much all you can stick in there. You take that out, and you can store some stuff in there, but not really all that much stuff. This car is just radically impractical, but the front area kind of shows why it's impractical. They've prioritized the functionality of these fans in here over the necessity of storage. That's what you get if you want a really, really crazy high performance car. By the way, one other interesting item I found tucked into the front trunk along with the car cover is the toolkit for this car. You can see it says LaFerrari on it. Just LaFerrari printed on this thing makes it dramatically more collectible than a regular Ferrari toolkit. I bet these things will be pulling like 10 grand on eBay in 5 years. But anyway, you unzip it, you open it up, and you can see there are a couple of tools in there, nothing crazy. There's also a pair of white gloves, so you can do roadside tire changes. in your LaFerrari with center lock wheels. Good luck. But anyway, in the middle you have the storage. Over on the left, you have the little tool that unlocks the center lock and the wheels, pretty common in exotic sports cars today. That's what's in the front of the LaFerrari. Not really all that much cargo space, instead, mostly just a fan. But at least it looks cool from this angle. And next we move on to the back of the LaFerrari and on to something that absolutely must be shown in any LaFerrari review. That would be the exhaust note. Take a listen. That is a seriously impressive exhaust note, one of the best I've ever heard, and it sounds just as good whether you're driving in it or whether you're outside of it and one of these goes by. It is absolutely an incredible sound. One other thing I like on the back of this car is down here below the license plate, you have this little box with 12 holes in it. That is a light. It is intended to be a rear fog light, and it's designed to mimic the rain light in Formula One cars. When it's raining, they turn it on so drivers won't slam into each other. And Ferrari has integrated it into their normal cars to kind of draw that connection to F1 cars. And I think that is a really, really cool idea and a neat look. And next we move into the engine compartment, and first we must discuss how to do that. It's actually pretty simple. You open up the door, and inside the door jamb on the back, there's a little latch that opens up the engine compartment. Then you just come around here and open it right up. It's pretty simple, but it doesn't just stay in place. Instead, you need to prop it. There are not too many cars I've seen that still use an engine cover prop, but this is one of them. I guess they skipped hydraulics to save weight, which seems ridiculous in a car this advanced, but that's the situation. Now, when the engine cover is open, you can see it's not like some of the prior Ferrari supercars. I showed you the F40 and the Enzo. When their engine cover is open, you can see the entire rear of the car. Basically, all of this bodywork comes off. The problem is it's very unwieldy to actually open that up. So in this car, it's easy to open, but you don't quite get to see as much, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But you can still see the giant V12 back here, absolutely massive. And you can also see some very, very important looking orange wires that hook up that V12 to the hybrid system. This is the future of Ferrari supercars. And next up, another interesting item in this engine compartment. There are some rather unusual warning labels in here. I'll start with this one at the base near the latch. I guess it's telling you how to open the engine cover. Step 1, you open the door, and then step 2, you open the engine cover. Seems to be skipping a few intermediary steps, but it's there. Very helpful, except that when the engine compartment cover is closed, you can't actually see it. So it's only helpful if you've already gotten it open. Not really sure why that's there. The other one, more interesting than that, a little bit above it, this warning label is for firefighters. In case the car is in an accident, catches on fire, there's actually a keyhole back here, where if you have the key, you can come back here and manually shut off the engine in case for whatever reason you can't do it up front, and I guess that will prevent it from catching on fire, or at least lessen the risk. I can't imagine this would ever actually happen. You get in a crash, the firefighters find the key, they come back here, put it in, turn it off, but it's there if you want it. Basically a second keyhole you can turn off the car using in case for whatever reason you don't have access to the front one. Very unusual. Haven't really seen that in any other cars, let alone in a Ferrari. And so those are the quirks and features of the LaFerrari. But before I get it out on the road, I'm going to talk with its owner, David Lee, about it for a little bit. So, does it scare you with how much it's worth driving it? You drive on the road?
Yeah, you know, I mean, a lot of people ask me that. For me, early on, I didn't want to lose the experience of driving the cars, because
right.
I feel robbed about that.
Right.
And so I still drive it, and as long as it's properly insured. You gotta be defensive, you gotta be smart about it. And then, but if I want to drive it fast too, I would take it to the track.
And so you've done that. You've actually tracked.
Yes. I took this on various tracks.
Is it just insane? Are you flat out when you do it? Do you do it hard, or
I do it hard?
Okay.
You know, I really
you're not worried about smashing it up.
Yeah. I do it real hard, and obviously the first day and the second day you get more brave. And automakers today, when they make the car, they don't just make it fast, and so that a professional can only handle it. They want to make it fast that an amateur owner can drive and have fun and be able to go fast. With the computers and everything, it just helps you go faster and faster, and you just get great times. Now, why I say that, because then at the same time when I had that race track event that I was also bringing the 288 GTO, which is totally analog, totally know-how, totally old school.
Right.
And I get on track, the same track, and go, and I realize how bad I was as a driver.
Oh, so you're saying that because this makes it easier for you to go fast, makes it easier.
Yeah, it makes it easier to be to have fun and be a better driver.
That car, you have to work at it more.
That car, you have to work at. You got to know what you're doing, and you got to really be. And actually, any of the cars prior to LaFerrari, because even the Enzo, which I have, I mean, there's no computer, it's all raw power. I mean, there's a little assist, so it's a little bit better, but really you got to be a good driver. And
so you feel comfortable doing that stuff, going hard and that kind of thing after enough lead up, and even with a car like this, as crazy as this is.
Well, I can tell you, as far as cars, I feel the most comfortable with this car.
Really?
Right. Driving fast and on the track.
Really?
Yeah, because front engine V12, it's front heavy, and for like 458 or the mid engine the V8s, those are better too. But you can't. The car doesn't seem like you can push it to ultimate because it doesn't have enough power to go that fast. So this car really is a combination where it's actually so perfect for.
Is this, we're sitting here with all of your cars, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
Is this your favorite?
So I love really all of them the same, but I think I would love it the best for the particular purpose. And I would love this car the best for the purpose of being on the track.
Right.
Whereas I would love a classic car for another venue. Or if it's for a concourse and you're doing the concourse thing, then that's a particular car for the concourse.
I put this diplomatically. Are you disappointed by the owners who don't use their cars?
Well, everybody has their prerogative, right? And if somebody wants to look at it as an art piece or just a status symbol that they have it, it's fine, because everybody's prerogative and everybody's interest to drive it is different. In the past, when I owned like a V8, mid-engine V8, and I was always worried about the depreciation, and I wouldn't drive it. After I sold it, and the memory that you have on it wasn't a lot. People would ask you, "Oh, you had that car? Okay." If they asked you a little bit,
what was it like? You don't know.
You really wouldn't know. And I said, and from that I feel robbed. I feel robbed from the experience. And I think there's a balance of whether money lost or depreciated because you drove the car, but then the wealth of memory that you gain from it, I think offsets it. It's a hard to price that. It's
totally. The actual experience you get from using it and enjoying it.
That always is with you.
Right. Sure. All right. Well, you want to take it out on the road? You ready?
Yeah, for sure.
You nervous?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I know you're good.
I am.
You are. Don't say that.
All right. Driving the LaFerrari. You ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
The first thing I'm struck by just getting in, driving it a little bit, is how stable it instantly feels. I mean, even just going around these little, it's just so precise, just as good as the best of anything in the world. Man, there's just a ton of power. I mean, that's a quarter throttle, and it just feels like there's endless torque, endless power.
I can say that I've driven this car 200 miles per hour, and even at 200, because a lot of cars, if they start topping out and they're slow, even at 200 miles per hour, the cars feel so steady, like you're not afraid that it's going to hydroplane or whatever. And also it has so much more power to go. Like you could really feel more power to go.
Wow. Yeah, it's clearly got a ton of power. Wow.
So you hear that little tick tick tick?
Yeah, what was that?
That's like when if it's a sound or the computer trying to tell you that, it's getting a little bit crazy, so you gotta
interesting. So it's like a nanny. It's like saying, hey dude. So it's not actively doing anything, it's simply warning you you may be going a little bit. What a weird thing.
So, like when you're turning and you're about, like, if you're going too aggressive, you might lose it. It will start to.
Do you pay attention to that? Like if it turns on, or are you like, okay,
I do. It's like a little nanny.
It's like a babysitter. It's like a minder telling you.
Yeah, before like all things go to heck.
It feels so stable. The transmission is so incredibly fast, which is actually surprising. This car is not brand new. It's a few years old. You would think you maybe feel a little bit of that, whatever. You don't. I mean, it feels as good as any new exotic that I drive. The ride is not as bad as I was expecting it to be. I mean, it's rough. You feel a lot. The lane line bumps are a nightmare, but it's not that bad. Do you, when you drove it on the track, so when you drive it on the street now, are you just like, you know how far below its capabilities we are?
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's just like walking right now, you know.
Right, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And just the precision, it's so incredibly capable. The one thing I'm struck by is the fact that it feels drivable and usable more than I was expecting. I thought there would be a lot of compromise. I thought it would be so low that we wouldn't be able to, you know, parking, getting in and out of places would be a problem. And driving on the street, visibility would be a problem. Actually, these ridiculous mirrors do a pretty good job of doing.
They do a really good job. I think, like, again, today's, the automotive companies right now are trying to achieve more drivability.
Right.
I mean, the days with the Enzo and the Carrera GT and everything, I mean, those were fast cars. They were so fast they were scary.
Right. You had to know what you were doing.
You had to really know it, and you wouldn't push it because you were afraid to push it.
It comes on fairly frequently.
I was at Maranello at the Ferrari factory. The official test driver, Dario, took me on the LaFerrari at that time, and that was before I even owned it.
Yeah.
To the track, to Monferrano track to go over.
Yeah.
And so he was, and obviously he knows the track the best. He's driving it fast. But through that whole time, that sound was going on all the time. Like the whole time, every turn, every braking, everything.
It's so good, though. It's just so good. Everything has just been engineered so well. Each car has kind of built off the prior one to the point where now everything is just fantastic. And so that's the LaFerrari. This is quite simply the ultimate Ferrari. It is incredibly rare. It looks ridiculous. Values are insane. Performance numbers are absolutely out of this world. It really is the ultimate Ferrari and one of the ultimate cars on the road today. And now it's time to give the LaFerrari a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the LaFerrari is gorgeous, of course, but it's just a bit more fussy than I'd like, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Acceleration is massive and intense, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is incredible, sharp, precise, basically as good as it gets, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fun factor is also huge. This car is more exciting than basically anything in existence, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Same with cool factor. This is one of the most special, most amazing, most noteworthy cars in the world, and it gets a 10 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 49 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features, and the LaFerrari is reasonably well equipped considering what it is, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is pretty good for a car like this, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Quality is okay, the interior is nice, everything is well made, but I, and probably most LaFerrari owners, worry about the longevity of the hybrid system. It gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is basically non-existent, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Finally, value, and this one is hard to rate. What is the right price for one of the most amazing cars in the world? These are insane money, but also insanely special, and it gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 23 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 72 out of 100, which places it here among the best supercars ever. The Bugatti Chiron beats it out, but the LaFerrari has a higher weekend score. The Bugatti is just a little more drivable every day. In fact, the LaFerrari beats out almost everything for weekend score, including the 918 Spider and even the Koenigsegg Agera RS1. This is certainly one of the most exciting, fun, truly incredible cars I've ever driven. The LaFerrari is Ferrari's fifth modern supercar, following up on the 288 GTO, the F40, the F50, and the Enzo, which I am pointing to because they're all sitting here.